Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 74 of Yoga Research and Beyond. We are talking about a paper that looks at why more women take yoga classes, why more women do yoga than men do, how do we get more men in yoga, and gender bias in research. That'll come up too. That's not what the paper is about, but we will end up talking about that a little bit. I'm your co-host, Ariana, founder of Yoga Research and Beyond, yoga teacher, strength trainer in New York City, and co-founder of New York Stretch.
I'm Jules Mitchell, and I live in Las Vegas, and I teach yoga teachers, mostly yoga biomechanics, research literacy, stuff like that, anatomy. And it's in the form of either continuing education or 300-hour yoga teacher training, mentoring programs, that kind of good stuff, learning places.
Yes, so needed. So this paper the title is Men. Sorry, I don't know why this is making me laugh already. Sorry. Men Need Role Models, Exploring the Facilitators and Barriers for Yoga Participation Among Men. It's from the American Journal of Men's Health. It's by Jonathan Y. Kagis and his colleagues from December of 2024, and the research was done in Australia. So the purpose of this paper, yoga is everywhere. It's very popular. There's a lot of benefits, but more women tend to do it than men. And so, why is that? And this paper explores the reason behind that. They go into they define what yoga is for us. How do they define it?
Well, they defined it as yoga is a holistic form of physical activity, including physical, mental, and sometimes spiritual components. That's how they defined it. And they talked a little bit about how its potential to promote health and well-being is great. And therefore, it shouldn't only be women that have access to it or should be comfortable doing it, and men should be encouraged to do it more. And they wanted to know what some of those challenges are. And I'm bringing up the definition because this is a research literacy podcast, so there's just some fun things that come up in my world teaching that I want to share with you here. And I had one of my students from the past send me a message when I posted this paper on social media, and she was just not okay with the definition. She was like, that's not what yoga is. It's positioned as exercise. Yoga is other things. And I was like, I understand, but that's not what the paper was looking at. And she was like, well, then why are they saying it that way? Why are they misleading? Why aren't they saying we're studying American yoga? And I was like, well, it's not even done in America, but okay. Or why are we studying the physical aspect of yoga? Like she's really hung up on the wording. And I had to kind of talk her down a little bit. And that's part of the process of research literacy. You have to ask yourself, what are you getting hung up on and why? Because that's not what the paper was studying. The paper was reporting on this whole thing. And therefore they had to give a definition to help the reader understand the parameters of the study. It's helpful to know that they weren't talking to the men about attending meditation classes. They weren't talking to the men about studying scripture. They were talking to the men about classes that are the physical form. And so therefore it's helpful to have that working definition. Just, a few things that I think are worth discussing around critical thinking, some lessons that we can take from rhetoric that are important. And I'm mentioning them because I'm going to be needing to take these lessons from rhetoric as we go through this podcast, because my bias is going to show up very strong in a minute. So I'm going to highlight that here so I can call myself out, and you as the listeners can call me out in your mind when you hear it. But some of the things that are worth doing, some steps, are when you're like, why are they defining yoga like that? And you get kind of upset about it. Pause and ask yourself, why you're hearing that message. Why is this not sitting right with you? That's a first question. And then after you've kind of sat back and asked yourself, why are you responding this way? Then the next kind of step is, can you hear or decipher the agenda in the language? And that can go both ways. That can be, can you hear, or decipher a biased agenda? Or can you just hear or decipher a descriptive agenda, which is what this is? I don't think that sounded very biased on what yoga should be, because the point of the paper isn't to convince you what yoga is. The point of the paper is how can we get more men into this kind of yoga? If the point of the paper was to prove, or research never proves, but to try to convince us what yoga is, then there might be a bias in that statement that you would need to decipher. So just deciphering what the purpose of the statement is a huge part of it. And then the other part is, do you need more context? And I think in this situation, you don't really need more context for that statement. In fact, the statement is the provider of the context, right? It's like telling you, okay, we're looking at group classes that are facilitated at studios and gyms, and they generally look like you roll out your mat and you do some sort of physical movements. And so that gives us the context for what we're about to dive into. So anyway, those are some things that are worth keeping in mind every time you read a paper, every time you are on social media, every time you're listening to someone use research to make a claim. It's important steps. Okay, back to you, Ariana.
Nice. So the paper is looking at what they call the barriers that exist for why men are not doing the yoga, and then how to get them to start, and then how to get them to stick with it. And they give some rates of the disproportionality of men versus women practicing yoga worldwide. So in the US and Australia anyway. So it's 8.3% men versus 18.8% women in the US, and 2% men and 10.9% of women in Australia. So the big difference there. And so the methods, how did they do this research? They had 4 focus groups, 3 with men. One of those focus groups was with women. It consisted of a 1.5 to 2 hour discussion. They did some follow-up interviews with 2 male teachers and 1 male who missed the group discussions. There were 15 participants total, 11 men up to 28 years old, 4 women who had been practicing yoga for 3 to 4 years. And most of them did yoga 1 to 3 times a week, doing vinyasa or yin yoga or ashtanga. And amongst all the groups, 82% of them did other physical activities in the last 6 months. So fairly active, physically active people. So some interesting, anything you want to mention about the methods before I go into?
Just that maybe I'll mention that this is a great example of a qualitative research study instead of quantitative. A lot of the things we look at are quantitative, where they're actually compiling data where they're compiling data in the form of numbers. And here we're just compiling data in the form of statements and thoughts. So they're just getting general themes and general overviews and ideas from the free form conversation that was happening, because there was a group. So they just kind of let everybody chat and roll with it. So worth mentioning.
Yeah. And so from these focus groups, from these conversations, they noted that men tend to perceive it as a feminine activity, that it's too gentle, it's not competitive enough, and that the marketing tends to target women also. So it's not just that it's a feminine activity, but marketing tends to target women. There isn't enough male representation in yoga, and these kinds of, quote, mindful and gentle activities don't fit into their perceptions of what masculinity is. And some things that they noted. So when do men try yoga? It's when, this is what kind of made me laugh. It's when they're encouraged. I can just picture this whole conversation, you should do yoga and whatever, and their resistance to it. But men are more likely to do it when friends or family or health professionals recommend it to them. This also made me chuckle that they need persistent encouragement. Persistent encouragement. Is it worth it? I don't know. More likely if it's positioned as supplemental fitness activity, or if it's therapeutic, they might do it. And so then, so what happens when men actually took these classes and tried it out? It's they suddenly felt self-conscious because they were like, oh, this is actually hard, and they weren't good at it. And they felt like they were being judged, like potentially being judged, or,
Like women feel in the weight room.
yeah. Yeah. And so it was like,
Yeah, we still go.
well, yes, we do. Yeah. I hope more women do. Although, yeah, one woman I was talking to, I forget what gym she said she goes to, but she said she sees a lot more women lifting the weights where it used to be more women. So that made me happy. So men didn't want to feel judged, but then they felt better. So what happened afterward? Oh, I think they felt better physically, mentally. And then some of them felt they were surprised to find, or maybe it was one man who surprised to find that there were so many different styles of yoga that it's, you can find something that will fit your perception of what masculinity is, if that's what you want it to be. So, yeah, I thought it was a nice flip that they thought it was going to be easy and too gentle, and then they found that it was quite difficult and hard for them, and then that became the reason they didn't want to do it. So yeah, those were some of the findings.
Yeah, they basically put the findings into like 3 categories, and you kind of said them, but I'll highlight them just for categorization purposes. So the first one was encouragement, right? So they were like, men need more encouragement to go to yoga. And, how can we do that? Like, what type of encouragement would they need? Was one of the questions that they were asking. And so
sounds like a lot of work.
Well, I guess my question is, if yoga is primarily like a woman's domain, do you know what I mean? The way that they've kind of explained it, more women teach yoga, more women do yoga, more women practice yoga. Like, they kind of insinuated it was like on us to encourage them, and I was a little bit like, why? Like, we're just here doing the yoga. Why don't you encourage each other? And of course, there are one of the students in my mentoring program is a teacher and is a men's yoga teacher. And of course, I sent this paper and he was like so excited, but there's an uphill battle for him and his business because I'm going to say patriarchal standards. Like, women are the arbiters of community. And one of the great things that we love about yoga is the community that it provides. I still have friends that I met in the yoga studio in my early 20s. We're still a circle of friends. We're friends through yoga. I have so many different circles of friends. I have all my international yoga friends. I have my friends all over the country. I have my friends in Las Vegas. Like, it was a huge part of community. And we are socialized to strengthen bonds through community. And I think men are not socialized to do that. And so it's not that we all need to encourage and be more inviting and teach without chakras to be more inviting to them. It's like maybe they should take it upon themselves to create community, and they might naturally navigate toward things like yoga. That was my first thought. The second one was gender perceptions, right? That was so we had encouragement and gender perceptions. You touched on all of that. But again, I think if men would just do the work to deconstruct patriarchy, that would go away. I'm doing the work to deconstruct patriarchy. And so therefore I go to the gym. You know what I mean? Why do I have to change gender norms why do we have to do it? Why can't an individual take it upon themselves to realize that this is something that they want and step outside of gender norms and get it done?
Yeah.
It came up again. And then the third one was the benefits. This one really got me the most because it's like, are we not communicating the benefits to them? I think of that statistic where single women live longer than married women, and men live longer when they're married than when they're single, because women are always encouraging men to go to the doctor and get all the benefits. So again, why is it society? I don't know that as patriarchal society will ever convince men that they should do things that benefit them, that require discomfort, self-motivation. You know what I mean? Because historically, maybe in the last 100 years, let's just say, a man gets married and then his wife does all that for him. And so he's led to a life of convenience. And so, I think if they did the work at the individual level and then found the benefits of yoga, they might go to yoga without having to be nagged by the wife. Like they even suggested in the paper, we asked women too, because they interviewed mostly men, but they interviewed women too, because women often have men in their lives that they want to go to yoga. Because again, it's the woman's responsibility to have the man do certain things. Men go to the gym. Of course they go to the gym, but I guarantee you they don't do it because of the spiritual benefits. There's probably some real aesthetic and again, cultural and gender bias behind it all. But so it's like, we don't only have to live in the way that we've been socialized. It's okay for us to do the work and make decisions for our health and well-being, for the things that we want, and not follow gender norms.
Yeah. And also just going out of our comfort zones, whether that's, that's, that we get so much benefit when we go outside of our comfort zones.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's where the growth happens.
Yeah.
So who cares if they mentioned Lululemon ads? Who cares if yoga is marketed to women? Why is that even a barrier? And I think what got to me in the paper was they didn't mention any of this. It was just like, oh, it's unfortunate. Yoga is marketed toward women. And it was kind of insinuating maybe we should change the way we market yoga or something. I was like, no, why don't we just deconstruct for ourselves and step into community and step in, and then all that. Then you know what will happen if everybody does that? If we all start deconstructing patriarchy, guess what? We won't be marketing yoga to women anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not because of the marketing, back to the cause and effect one that we did the last time. Right. It's just the way we're all socialized. We're socialized so strongly to take certain roles and do certain things and appear a certain way. And, we can change that at the individual level and then at the community level. And I wish the paper had touched on that. It sounded to me just really like, you guys, you really should cater to men a little bit more because they're really missing out on this yoga. And, if you just don't be so girly, that's what it sounded like to me when I read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no hate on the paper.
No.
It was done really well. I liked the methods. I liked the message. It's just because it was such a qualitative paper, I would have liked to see conversations like we just had, more overarching societal implications. Instead of, it's like, well, you just have to express the benefits more, be more clear to the men. It's like telling a man the benefits of yoga isn't going to get him to go. Deconstructing patriarchy might. You know what I mean? Trust me, I've dated a lot of men. I've had a lot of long-term relationships, and they always come to yoga with me the first month or two of dating, and then they never come again. And they know the benefits. It's not enough to convince them. It's like, and it's not my job to. It's not my job to, right? It's their job to do that work.
Take it upon themselves. Absolutely. Yeah. That being said, we could, it'd be great to have more male yoga teachers to facilitate that,
Well, I have something to say about that. I remember hearing this, maybe 15 years ago. I don't remember where it was. It was at a conference or something. There was a big discussion. And somebody mentioned that there are male yoga teachers. They're just usually the authoritative yoga teachers.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That it's in the community, again, because the community is the woman's domain, right? Mm-hmm. We have many more women yoga teachers, and they compared it to cooking. More women cook, but we have more male chefs.
Yes.
Right? So more, because the chef has the more authority than the cook who's cooking every single meal for the entire family for their entire lives. That doesn't get any respect, but the chef gets respect. Yes, chef. Right. And so it's very similar, I see in yoga. There are not a lot of male yoga teachers at your studios and at your gyms, but somehow we have a lot of male yoga educators in roles like I'm in, and so how is that so disproportionate to the amount of people that are doing yoga, taking yoga, teaching yoga?
Right.
That's another deconstructing patriarchy.
That's
We're more likely to elevate,
because of how yoga came to the US was through all the male authorities that you're talking about. And then Ashtanga, was not a female practice when in India. It was all young adolescent teen boys. So yeah.
And even just in our regular social world, it's just, we're talking about changing DEI, and I saw a thing saying like white men have been the DEI this whole time. They've been the benefit, they're disproportionately benefiting. And, if there's not as many male men in the yoga space, in the yoga community, how are we elevating so many of them? I wouldn't mind if we had a lot of men out, but I take yoga at my gym regularly, and I would say it's probably 20% men on average. Sometimes we'll get 30 or 40 in a class, but then another class there'll be none. So I would say it's about 20%. And I'd love to see more.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I love this conversation.
Yeah. Kind of got off the rails from research literacy, but it's important. It counts.
So this is what happens. You read the papers, and it spurs up responses. So that's good.
And it's important because then it helps us recognize gender bias and patriarchal standards in research. And so if you're not recognizing it just in other studies that aren't about actually gender bias and all of that, but you should be able to see it. And the name of the podcast is Yoga Research and Beyond. So
yeah, and
we went
beyond today. Yeah,
we definitely did.
Yeah, just to bring it back to the paper before we close out, this was a small sample size in terms of some possible limitations. And, as Jules mentioned, this is qualitative research. So it's perceptions of people's perceptions and not hard data. So it's not general, but still insightful. And they were all white. So that has an impact as well. And it's a Western perspective. So those are some more limitations on this paper. Anything else you want to add?
No.
Cool. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Please subscribe and share with your fellow yoga teachers. And let's keep the conversation going about how we can use research, talk about research to inspire and inform our teaching. See you next time.